Now to the final part of our conversation with world-renowned Australian author Thomas Kenneally.
You have received global acclaim for your novel Schindler's Ark, which was adapted into the Hollywood movie Schindler's List by Steven Spielberg. Some people might be surprised that an Australian in the New World wrote about the story, which is set in Europe and centered on Jewish history, the Holocaust, and in Nazi Germany. Can you share with us the highlights of writing this story, the information gathering, and other research activities that contributed to the Schindler's List?
Well, now, Sydney is a long way from North Africa, but my father was a soldier, an Australian soldier in North Africa. The Australians fought with the British, of course, against the Rommel in the desert. And my father used to send me back things from the battlefield, things he collected, or things he'd taken off prisoners. I don't know what, but he sent me back a pistol, a Nazi pistol and holster that I don't have the pistol, but I do have the holster. He sent me back a flare pistol. He sent me back, and he'd send them back in cake tins. He'd send me back Italian fascist postcards, German corporal stripes with the swastika on, all sorts. And so I made acquaintance with the Third Reich when I was 2. And again, in the story of Schindler, you have that wonderful tension between a man being a member of a tribe, ethnic German from Moravia, ethnic German who came to Moravia as during the operation of the Austro-Hungarian Empire and settled down there. And he belongs to that tribe, Sudeten-Deutsch people, Sudeten German. And he encounters this other tribe, and he doesn't want any of them to die. And indeed, he took, I've recently suggested to Stephen, without success, that we make a mini-series out of the other aspects, because he did things that were even endlessly astonishing, that involved recognizing the person's dignity as a fully paid member of the species. So he was on the side of mitochondrial Eve, and he was fighting a regime that was on the side of the tribe and delusion. You know, Luther was a great hater of Jews. So in Australia, where hatred of Jews was not, there was a certain suspicion of Jews, but it all started with Christ. You know, they didn't become Christians. And so the Christian religion was a religion that discriminated against Jews. Not enough Jews joined the Christian faith. So I was raised in that Christian tradition, which is broader than just going to church. One of the things is that the King James Bible, so much literature, so much literary reference comes out of that it is part, the King James Bible is still part of communist writers' vocabulary in the West, because it was so strongly known when I was a kid. And so it's a cultural it's a cultural cosmos as well. And I was amazed that my betters in Europe were so upset about Jews to the extent that they felt they had to die, they had to be killed for the safety of European culture. When I first met the man who had been a Schindler Jew in Los Angeles in 1980, I looked at him, and he was a vivid man, older than me at that stage, good talker. And I thought, what is it about you that Hitler believed you had to die for the good of European culture? What was it that made the Nazis determined to take your oxygen away from you? And only this eccentric Nazi, Schindler, saved you. And his name was on Schindler's List. He showed me Schindler's List that day in 1980 when I first heard the story. And that's one of the reasons I didn't get what ate them. I can imagine perhaps being prejudiced against a group, as we all even unconsciously are. But I can't imagine taking their jobs away, refusing access to schools, taking their apartments away, taking their businesses away, putting them in ghettos, then using them as slave labor, and then exterminating them. In Australia, as you know, that racism between the whites who were told, again, the Bible, you see, the Bible says, go forth and make the world fruitful and multiply. Now, when some Europeans saw the Aboriginal desert nomads, they thought they're good for nothing. Why didn't they build a hotel here where we're going? They've built nothing. In fact, they were maintaining the whole continent. And therefore, if they get in the way of my farm, I can shoot them because they didn't make the earth fruitful. They didn't follow God's command. So you've got to watch. The terrible thing is that good communists have to read the Bible to understand the West. As you have to, if you're going to understand Islam, you have to read the Quran. And so I was fascinated that this had happened and that my father had been in contact with German soldiers, part of the machine that did this. They were just poor kids in the desert. They were as lost as he was and as scared all the time as he was. But we thought of them as the Nazis we saw in the American propaganda movies. And so altogether, I was fascinated by the Reich and by the fact they took this ridiculous, to me, ridiculous option. And I think to this day it was a ridiculous option. It doesn't mean that I love Mr. Netanyahu. Mr. Netanyahu is a politician and a right-wing politician, and I tend towards the left. But no, I don't tend towards the left. I simply have common sense. But the research involved going around to people who'd been through this trauma. And they didn't necessarily want to talk about it. But my friend Leopold, the man from whom I bought the briefcase, in whose store I heard the story of Schindler's List and Schindler's Ark, I was able to interview all these people because of him. And he vouched for me. And I was able to interview then by letter Oscar's wife, for whom I have a great deal of sympathy. She said that she was never consulted on the book of the film, but I understand why she said that. She was consulted by me. She didn't want to be directly interviewed, otherwise I would have gone and done it. But she would answer questions through her lawyer in San Vicente, Argentina. And so hearing from the woman to whom he'd been so unfaithful was very interesting. And it was part of the fact that to the Me Too generation, quite rightly, Oscar would seem an appalling husband and a sexual adventurer. And the one thing I would want to do in an expanded telling of the story would be to tell a lot about that relationship. But there is a lot about it inside the book. There is more about it in the book than in the movie, as the writer always says. And the interviewing the survivors, they were people in successful midlife. They didn't necessarily want to go back to a time where they were daily in terror and daily in danger, and a time in which they were Untermenschen, subhumans, by decree and by legislation. And so I'm very grateful to them that they gave me their material. They read the book when it was finished and corrected aspects of it, and I'm very grateful for that as well.
The discovery and writing of Schindler's List had a strong American connection. You also have been interested in Australia's shared colonial and Irish Catholic histories with the United States, where you have spent some years teaching at the University of California. In what significant ways are Australian and American societies similar and different?
Well, we are similar in that we talk a lot about the fair go and democracy and so on, but we are not similar in that Australia was a place that was so big and has such a small population, and this is a dimension of Australia too that is hard for us to face. It's hard to defend. It's hard to have an independent defense policy because it's so big. It doesn't have a Mississippi, a river and its tributaries right through Central Australia. Central Australia is underpopulated. It is hard for us to defend ourselves. That is, I'm not giving away a safe state secret. It's obvious. And so this brought a dependence on the US and on, before that, on the United Kingdom. And let me tell you that one great difference is because of that sparsity of population, we have had to depend on government to get, say, email or health or whatever to the furthest little community. And because it wouldn't pay a capitalist setup to get the Wi-Fi out there, to get it. And therefore, in Australia, the railroads were built by government. And government had a much bigger role. And we didn't mind that. We want government to be involved in education, health, which we tend to see as birthrights and not as consumer items. Whereas the Americans are still arguing about health insurance for everyone. The Americans are still arguing that they look upon. I remember landing a plane on an aircraft carrier, or being in a plane that landed on an American aircraft carrier called the Kitty Hawk some years ago. And there was a cocktail party when we landed in which we drank fruit juice. It wasn't a Chinese or Australian style. And these two surgeons said, we were out at Westmead Hospital yesterday. And I said, oh, that's interesting. My brother was head of anesthetics and analgesia at the Children's Hospital. And they said, your system of medicine is very socialist. And that is the big difference. What they see as socialism, we see as a birthright. And that is a big difference. That's why you don't have a big tea party type of thing in Australia. That's why the extreme right, which is big in America, is less visible. And we let many Americans have wanted me to explain to them why we let the government take our arms away. Because we are not appalled when government takes a stance on an issue, unless it's the wrong stance. And therefore, that is a big difference. We are less libertarian than they are.
Thinking about Australia's relationship with China, how should we continue to strengthen the bilateral relationship?
Well, I think it's between people like you and me in particular, and our masses of people, the masses of young who have now married into Chinese families who can speak Mandarin, the masses and the massive amount of cultural exchange. I need an interpreter to understand, and I need to read books to understand all of Chinese culture. But my wonderful translator, Li Yao, has translated a number of my books into Chinese and is going to to translate another, which has a lot about England and space and Aboriginal culture and the Australian environment above all in it. It's a book called The Dickens Boy. Charles Dickens sent his last son to Australia. So those issues continue to motivate me as a writer.
Do you have any advice for young Chinese academics and students who are interested in becoming literary writers?
Well, can I ask you, what do people in China think of Carl Jung?
I suspect not many people know about Carl Jung.
Well, Carl Jung was a psychiatrist who said that we all carry this tub of archetypes and characters, of plots, of schemes, of plans, and it is not this collective unconscious is the collective unconscious of the race, and it's born in every child. Now, I believe that I think W.B. Yeats said, only begin. Of course you can't write, but don't let that stop you. Just begin. Begin to write, and you will access this well of archetypes and of tales and of plans and schemes and psychological knowledge that you didn't even know you had. All this symbolism you didn't even know you possessed. All this starts to come into being once you start writing. So write, if you are overwhelmed by the idea of writing your book, because I believe anyone can write a book, look at this. If I can write a book, you can. So you begin writing in small ways, but regularly. You let your subconscious prime you with your unconscious, your collective unconscious, which has all the wisdom and all the ritualism of that we share as human beings. I remember seeing an Aboriginal speak to a parenti, a big lizard, before he clubbed it to death. He had brought it down with a boomerang and he clubbed it to death. Up in the Arctic, off Siberia, on an island that belongs to the Inuit or Kupik people, I've seen them drag in a whale they caught, a priest in each boat with walrus skin boats that are translucent. Quite a sight. And when the whale had been landed on the beach. And no fanfare was made about it. The Europeans there weren't told about it. An old woman with a bucket of water went down and began to splash the whale on the face and to speak to it. And I thought, why does a man hunting in Australia and a woman who's never been to Australia and lives on the coast of Siberia on this godforsaken treeless island, why do they both do the same thing with what they've hunted? And Jung would say it's because it's in us, the same ceremonies, the same rites of passage, the same desire to make a fuss over weddings and to be joyous at weddings, even though they might end up hating each other. and to be joyous when a child is born, and to be and to have the same kind of basic rituals with nuances, with cultural nuances. And all this, says Jung, comes from the collective unconscious. And the reason why Aboriginal and Eskimo and Pueblo Indian all sing for the return of the sun, all perform certain rituals, is so the sun will come back. In their culture, they have no guarantee it will if they don't maintain the engine of the earth that brings the sun back through ceremonial. And so we are a very interesting crowd. And I believe that ultimately the first draft, if you write 500 words a day for 3 months, you have a mass of material. And it's like, some days it'll be like writing a letter to a relative you hate. And other days it will be like writing a letter to a man or woman you love. It'll be joyous. But at the end of 3 months, you'll have a mass of stuff. It won't be publishable, but it's what you start on. You have defeated the empty page. And if you keep working on it, it will be howlingly imperfect. But you're not the point. The novel is the point. And if you keep doing that, it will be perfected by a wisdom that is older than you and influences that are older than you and are shared by. But where does the story come from when a child says, "Mummy, tell me a story"? It comes right out of that well of stories, which is in us. And telling a child a story, you tell them more than you intended to. There's unexpected elements in there. And that's the collective unconscious helping you out.
Thank you, Tom, for that very good advice. I'm sure our Chinese colleagues and students would appreciate that very much. Do you have any other comments or advice for our Chinese audience?
Well, I hope you'll remain interested in us. I think that we will be interested in you. I often say, as a joke, we are China's southernmost province. We don't know whether we want to be America's new state or China's southernmost province. It depends what trade minister we're talking to. In any case, please keep your interest in us and be assured we will keep our interest in you. And although individual friendships can't overcome the force of politics, nonetheless, if enough of us get to know each other, it'll become impossible to suspect each other of ill will. And thank you for the interest China has shown in me to this point.
Your Chinese friends asked me to convey their best wishes to you. wishing you good health and also looking forward to your visit in the near future once the public health concerns are overcome.
Yes, indeed. Indeed. I had a wonderful thing on my last journey. There was a young woman appointed in Harbin to help me on stage because they knew I was at that stage 83. So they thought I started, when it was time to go up to give the talk, I started running up the steps. She hauled me back and said, "It's my job to help you on stage." So I hope both that I have a attendant like that next time I come, but that I'm also well enough to walk on stage.